We had 7 years there. We thoroughly enjoyed it, and the friends we made there we keep in touch with, and they keep us up with the news, and whenever we see the weather person standing in front of Scilly on the map, we get as irritated now as we did when we lived there.
And you've been back recently as well, haven't you?
Yes, we went there in May, and we had a lovely time renewing friendships and enjoying the scenery and having a bit of warmth, because as you know it's snowing here, but I hear you've had snow in Scilly.
Now, obviously they're both islands. What similarities and major differences have you come across, particularly in your ministry?
Similarities, I think, are people's ability to stand alone, their self-sufficiency, and plenty of stuff in the shed for when things go wrong. We find too, like Scilly, a great deal of interest in neighbours and friends' lives, and a terrific amount of ready support for anyone who's struggling, going through a hard time or poorly. We found here, just as we found in Scilly, people rallied round without ever having to be asked. They just appeared being helpful, and that's very heartening. Differences, well, this is much larger than Scilly. The temperature is different most of the time, and we notice it most in the garden. What will grow here and what won't is quite a big contrast. So we enjoy our memories of Scilly and our trips back there, not least to see the stuff that grows and grows so well.
I suppose that there's still what we call the corner shops here, and when we went back to Scilly in May, sadly they seem to be suffering a bit, whereas here we've still got the out-of-town corner shops, which are very much areas of social get-together as well as shopping. We can get most things. We tend to favour the co-op. There was a bit of resistance to Tesco coming over because they do tend to take over and cut other people out, but you can get most things you need up here. But then we didn't really have a problem with Scilly, didn't we? We weren't shoppers, or I definitely wasn't a shopper. You got what you needed, and what you didn't get, you just changed your menu there and then. More difficult for people that had hotels and bed and breakfast, though, especially when you had visitors. But no, we don't have a problem there, and there's certainly down on the street, which is the main street, is very much a social area where people get together as well as do their shopping. And there's everything that you need, and of course we haven't got a huge amount of dairy herds, but there is local milk, and there's a lot of local produce, like fish and what else is the local produce?
A lot of vegetables.
Vegetables, yes, and of course there's the Shetland knitting, and but unfortunately so much of that now is going out because it's getting expensive and they export it, but there's still those that are interested and do it from home.
Because when I was asked to come up here to be interviewed, I said, well, surely they'll not want someone from southern England, they'll want a Scot. And we discovered there's quite a bit of antipathy towards Scotland. Shetland feels itself more akin to the Scandinavian countries, and perfectly happy to employ someone from England in my job, and they have regularly done so. So we felt very much at home here. And while politically we're part of Scotland and we return a member to the Scottish Parliament, who's a very nice Shetland man, the links are a little bit stretched and joked about. I mean, we obviously value the support from there, but it's distinct. I think people in Scotland would say that Shetland has its own identity, and it's far enough offshore to ignore some of the regulations anyway.
We actually are 3 miles nearer as the crow flies to Bergen than we are to the tip of Scotland, and of course, as you know, having come on the boat, it takes 12 hours direct overnight, or 14 hours if it goes via Kirkwall, which is on the Orkney, and of course you can fly in an hour from Aberdeen, but an hour and a half if you're coming from Edinburgh or Glasgow. So we are, although we don't feel remote, it's a little bit different than just sort of the distance from Cornwall to Scilly.
The Shetland dialect is quite strong, and we're getting used to understanding it, but when we first came it was a real challenge when people were speaking in the dialect. But it's a lovely, I think, as you mentioned, a lovely lilting sound, and to hear it spoken sort of genuinely and warmly, it draws you in rather than pushes you out, I think. They're rather like the Scottish use of pubs. They're mainly for what you call serious drinking. There's very little food on offer. You go there to drink, they're not places just to laze around in quite so much. There are clubs like the British Legion and other centres that cater on a slightly wider sort of menu. But yes, the drinking culture is different here. It's not quite the sort of leisure pubs that we were used to in the south.
Yes, one of our sadnesses, I mean, obviously we're working from the church as Christians, the sadness is that so many of the young people, and I mean young people from 13 upwards, seem to be getting drawn into this drinking culture, and we've just employed, or are able to employ with the help of grants, a youth and community worker, because we feel as from the church that we can be somehow involved to be a place where some of these youngsters can come and have some fun and not just feel that they have to go to the pub. And that is a sadness. So we're quite excited about this new youth worker, aren't we? She's come here for 5 years, and we're hoping that will, enable us to sort of more integrate with some of the youngsters that have nothing to do with the church at all.
Out in the country, most of the doors are left open. I think people are hunting around to find the key when they go on holiday just to lock it up. A little bit more in the town, we find doors are locked more. Not least because a lot of people come into the town from fishing fleets and from a lot of people from Eastern Europe who aren't known and don't have much command of English, and so some folk are a little wary of them. But certainly it is a warm and friendly open door culture, but not quite as relaxed as Scilly, I guess, partly due to the scale. And so although the Shetland community knows itself very well, some outsiders may come and not get into that community for a while, but we found them personally very, very welcoming, just as we were welcomed in Scilly. It's great. In Scilly, from time to time, I have a sea burial for people who died. Here, that's never done, partly because the place is so well fished, and there's a fear that the body would be brought up again. So that I noticed as a difference. I expected to have quite a lot of sea burials here, but it is not done at all. The other thing is, there's here, like Scilly, there's only burial grounds, and they're all by the sea, just like Scilly's are, except on a large scale, and there's dozens of them. So that's interesting. Weddings are interesting because under Scottish law you can marry people anywhere. So I find myself sometimes doing weddings in golf clubs and hotels and things, which has been a novelty for me. But the conducting of Sunday worship is very similar indeed. The sort of
just have farther to travel, don't you? Because the churches are more spread out, and but it's not like driving on the mainland. It really is quite relaxing driving between the churches, isn't it? Even though if we were to go to a top island, which we go to once a month, that takes us 2.5 hours to get there before you start the service, and that's 3 road trips and 2 ferries. So that's more of an interesting difference, isn't it? You have, although we used to go over to St Martin's, but there's a bit of difference between a 20-minute ferry and 25 minutes to St Martin's, wasn't it? Here, of course, you've got a 20-minute ferry and a 10-minute ferry, and you have to allow more time. But people are very hospitable and, of course, provide you with food, just as they did on Scilly, so that's a sort of the same.
Yes, the same privilege of being allowed into people's lives to some extent.
Yeah,
it's a great honour, and we, to our delight, found it the same here as we have in other places. I think the friendships we made were just lovely, because we saw the people we were with the church community particularly so often. We really grew to know each other well, and that was such a joy, and those memories stay with us. We don't see people here quite as often, if you see what I mean. We are making good friends here, but in the intensity of Scilly's life meant that we were very close to quite a lot of folk and felt absorbed by them, very much part of what was going on. It was a lovely feeling, tremendous experience.
And I mean, one thing I think, there was a lovely relationship that we have with the local sort of, if you say in Scilly, there was a good relationship with the hospital. If somebody was in need, or if we could help out or help the police, there was much more of an integration. Whereas here, because it's a much bigger place, although we are finding that, you know, we're gradually making more relationships, it just takes a bit longer. But I suppose that's, I mean, it was lovely the way we were very much part of society. We felt Scilly was an integrated whole. You know, it wasn't, all the churches were very much the centre, not just on the periphery. And it was very much a community, wasn't it?